Respected brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. First of all, I would like to convey my thanks to the office bearers of the Indian Muslim Association for organizing this program. This program gives us an opportunity to enhance our knowledge and skills in this field, what we are going to discuss today. I wish we could have conducted this program where we could have attended and interacted in person. But as we all are aware, this current situation is not allowing us to do that. But still, I will try my level best to cover the relevant topics under the today's subject. And I hope that it meets your expectations. I have been told that my allocated time is 1 hour. Although the subject is very wide, but still I will try to keep it within the allocated time frame. And after this program, after the presentation, then we will have the question answer sessions also. We will take up some questions. You can see the presentation on your screens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just make it full screen, please.
Okay. Just be with me. Just be with me for a moment, please. Now it is full screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
it's very clear.
Okay. So this is the outline of our session today. In this course, we will be covering a brief of the fundamentals of the contracting functions in an industrial environment. So this is our topic today. This is going to be the content. You might have received it on the flyer that was circulated for today's program. So we'll be having the definition, contracting objective, elements of a valid contract, contract stakeholders, contract language, project life cycle, contracting process, different stages, stakeholder and activities, and different type of contracts, and a brief comparison of the different type of contracts. And then we will have the tender fees. My apology for the spelling. Tender fees, bank guarantees and bonds, and insurance policies. So this is the content for our today's session. So to start with, how we define a contract? In simple language, a contract is a legally binding agreement between identified parties where each party commits to fulfill the terms and conditions of the agreement. Or in a more technical terms, you can say agreement between two or more entities, because there could be the contract between more than two entities also. And this contract is creating enforceable obligations to do something or to refrain something from something in exchange of considerations to all involved parties. So here, there are two keywords, obligations and consideration. Or in the other words, you can say the rights and obligation. So the right of one party is the obligation of the other party. For example, if you engage a contractor to construct your house, so the contractor obligation is to construct the building, and your obligation is to make the payment to the contractor. Or vice versa, if you say it is the contractor right to get the payment while it is his obligation to construct the building. So you can say the right of one party becomes the obligation for the other party. So that is how we define a contract. Now, how we define the contract management? Because in the industrial environment, the contracting is a long-term process. It goes through many stages. So, and it is spread over a long period of time. So for that reason, we use different tools and we sectionalize the different activities in order to monitor closely, just to ensure that what has been promised by the contractor is delivered by the contractor. The definition you can see on the screen. Contract management is basically set of tools and activities to ensure that the contractor delivers, these are the keywords, delivers what it has promised to the company, and the contractor is remunerated. The contractor is paid back for the work the contractor is delivering to the owner or the client. So this is the brief definition of the contract management. Now coming to the contracting objective. So when you intend to sign a contract with any entity, so there are few objectives you have in your mind. First of all, you want to carry out some defined scope of work, or you want to have some defined services from the contractor. Second element is, because contracts involve financial considerations, so definitely having a competition to ensure that you get the value for money from the contractor, you try to have a competitive bid from the different contractors. And those contractors must be qualified. So that is why we are using the word suitable contractors. So you invite competitive bids from qualified contractors who are capable to do the job. Third element of this contracting function is very important, that the job must be completed within the specified duration. It cannot be like we sign a contract and it is never ending and the contractor is working at his own pace. No, there is a specified duration for carrying out the job. So this is also an integral element. Then the next is, the work should be carried out meeting the required specifications, standard and quality. I'm not saying the best quality, we are saying the required quality, because you will get the quality based on the price you are paying to the contractor. But definitely what you have specified in your statement of requirement, the contractor is expected to deliver that quality to you. And next element is, the work should be completed on the agreed price. It cannot be like we agree on a price and we start the work and then the contractor demand more without any reason. So that cannot be the case. The work has to be completed on the price agreed by both the parties. And definitely every organization will have its own set of rules and policies. So this contracting function must be carried out in compliance with the law, regulations, and the policies of the organization. So this is briefly about the contracting objective. Basically, we all deal in contracts in our day-to-day life, whether we realize it or not, but the fact is we all deal with contracts. In broader terms, we can classify the contracts two types. One is the informal contract, and second is the contracts by deed. Informal contracts are the unwritten contract, which are normally for the simple jobs and for low value jobs, and it is between the non-entities. For example, if you have something to fix in your house and you call somebody to do some repair job, so it is also a contract, because you are telling the person, you have to fix the tiles in my, say, the apartment. So this much is the area, this is the quality of the tile. So you agree on all the terms and conditions, and the person knows what exactly he has to do. But you are not signing a written agreement with this gentleman. So this is basically unwritten contract. And like one of my friend, he was shifting his house. So he called the gentleman, I want to shift from this house to this house. Now you make an assessment of all the goods in my house, and then you decide like how much you will charge me. And then you have to take this, all the goods from one house to the another house, and you have to fix it again to the same, in the same way you have to put it there in the new house. So it is also a kind of an agreement, but it is an unwritten contract. While the written contracts, These are for the complex nature of jobs and for the medium to high values. And these are normally signed between two commercial establishment, like two companies which are registered under the Chamber of Commerce or the Ministry of Industry, wherever. So it is signed between the two commercial establishments. For example, like if you want to construct a multi-story house, then you have to sign a contract because there are so many elements that you have to take care, and everything has to be put down in writing because you cannot remember everything for such a complex job. So this is a broader classification of the contracts. Now coming to the elements of a valid contract. This is also very, very important slide. I will spare a few minutes here so that we have the full clarity in our mind. The first element for a valid contract is there should be an agreement. The one party accept the offer of the other party. You might have heard this phrase, meeting of minds. Like what one party is offering, the second party is accepting it in totality, and what the second party is offering, the first party is accepting it in totality. So there is an agreement between both the contracting parties. This is the first element. Second element is the consideration. It means each party or each side must promise something to the other party. It cannot be like only one party is making the promise and second party is not making any promise in return. Then it means the requirement of the consideration is not being met. So both the party must make a promise to the other party. This is the second point. Third element is the intention to create legal relations. So both parties realize and they agree that by entering into a contract, they will have the legal consequences and they must be ready to face the legal consequences if something goes wrong. So when they sign a contract, they know very clearly that they will have the legal obligations and they may have to face the legal consequences. The fourth element is the consent. Both parties must enter into the contract with a free consent. It should be without any pressure, without any undue influence, or without any kind of a threat. I'm sorry, I may be using some yani of the some kind of examples. But for example, you cannot sign a contract on a gunpoint. You cannot put a gun on the head of somebody and ask him to sign a contract. So it means the person is not signing this contract with his own free will. So such contract will not be considered as a valid contract. The next element is the capacity. By capacity, we mean that you must be legally capable to enter into a contract. You must have seen in all the industrial contracts, normally both the parties submit the power of attorney for the person who is signing the contract. It means they are certifying like this person is having the capacity to sign this contract. You might have heard like many times in the media or the social media, like somebody sold Taj Mahal or somebody is selling plots on moon. So these people, they don't have any legal capacity to do those kind of transactions. So such contracts cannot be considered as a valid contract. Then the next element is the legality. So the purpose of the agreement or the contract must be legal. For example, if two parties or two persons sign a contract for the supply of drugs, so since drugs are illegal, so this kind of a contract does not have any legality because the purpose of this contract is not legal, so it cannot be considered as a valid contract. So the purpose of the contract must be legal. And the last element, which is also very important, is what we call as a form, like this contract must be in the written form. Since I mentioned in the beginning, like we are talking the contracting business and the functions in the industrial environment. So all these elements must be met, then only we can say it is a valid contract. If any one of the element is missing, then it will not be a valid contract. this is about the different contract stakeholders. When we draft a contract, we have to think much ahead, like who may be involved in this contract which we are signing today. So I have listed some of the stakeholders. There could be some others also. Like the first two stakeholders, the company, the client or the owner, and the contractor, which are basically entering in the contract. These are the two most important stakeholders because their stakes are highest in the contract. Then there are subcontractors and vendors also who are carrying out some jobs or supplying some material. They are also the part of the contract. Like in this pandemic situation, we realize it. Like many contractors, they have placed orders for different materials in China. And when we have this lockdown in China, all the factories were closed and it was affecting our contract. So you can see the vendor becomes a stakeholder in our contract. Similarly, we have the statutory authorities. There are many government agencies. I have listed few of them here. Like in the Kuwait environment, you can see we have the Environmental Protection Authority or Ministry of Communication or Ministry of Defense. They are also the stakeholder. There are some sites where if you want to do the work, you have to get the clearance from the Ministry of Defense. Like recently, there was some project going on. So still we find some ordinances left from the Iraq war. So you have to get the Ministry of Defense clearance before working on this site. So even the government agencies can become your stakeholder. And you have to obtain prior approval from them. Similarly, most of the organizations, medium to large organizations, they have the system of auditors. We have the internal as well as the external auditors who try to monitor the different activities in the contracting. So we have to remember, like they can also audit our contract and they may look for any kind of a non-compliance or any kind of an anomaly. So we have to be careful and take care of all these things from the beginning. Similarly, the public can also be one of the stakeholders. For example, if two entities enter in a contract for constructing some industry, which is having some impact on the public. Like recently we have seen in India, in Chennai, there was some smelting unit and it was affecting the health of the people. There was some gas leak and we still remember the Bhopal gas tragedy very well. So if the contract is going to affect the public, so they can also become one of the stakeholders. And in India, you may be knowing it very well, the PIL, public interest litigation, is a very, very hot subject. And it is used very frequently where the public approach the court to get some kind of a relief against the different contracts between the government sometime or the industries. So public can also be one of the stakeholders. And then the last two, we have the arbitrators and the court. Like if there is a dispute between the contracting parties, then we may end up in arbitration or the court. That is another topic, like where we go for arbitration and where we go for the court. There are some international companies, they prefer to have the arbitration clause in the contract because they consider it as a neutral entity. Although the court is also expected to be neutral, but sometimes international companies are not comfortable to follow the local court and they prefer to have the arbitration. So just to summarize, as I mentioned, the contracting is a long cycle. So we have to be careful thinking much ahead, like maybe down the line, 1 year, 2 years. Today we are signing the contract when we go for the execution or when we go for the operation. So what may go wrong? So we have to take care of all those things starting from the beginning. So this is briefly about the contract stakeholders. Dear brothers and sisters, drafting is a very, very important aspect of the contracting activities. And in the contracting business, there is a lot of communication between the contracting parties. So here are some of the recommendations about using the language in our communication or in the drafting. So first of all, we have to be very clear, it is not all about English writing. So we have to be precise and clear. You state clearly what you want from the other party. If you are the client, so you please state down your requirement very clearly. This is what we want the contractor to deliver. At the same time, use the standard phrases and vocabulary. No need to make it very complicated English, and sometimes some words may be having different meanings, two meanings. So try to avoid those kind of vocabulary and those phrases and stick to the standard phrases and vocabulary. Even if you write a very simple sentence of English, that may be better rather than writing a very complicated sentence which may be interpreted differently or which may be difficult to comprehend to the other party. So more clear you make to the other party, you can expect a better bid from the contractor. Then repetition is another problem. You see, the contract has got different sections. So it is normally recommended that you should try to avoid repetition. You should try to address the subject at the right section in the contract document. Because sometimes it happens, we are writing the same thing at three places. For example, we are having the particular conditions of the contract, we are having the technical specification, and we have got some price attachments. So, for example, if you're writing the same thing at the three places and you are developing the tender package, and later on you decide to make some change. So there is a possibility or there is a risk like you will make the change in the particular conditions of the contract and you may forget to change it in the technical specification. It is something we encounter very regularly. I just want to give one example. I came across one case where the drawing was showing one lift and the technical specification was showing two lifts to be provided. So if you have such kind of a conflict, then it unnecessarily create conflict and dispute between the contractor and the company or the client. Although we have the opportunities to fix it, but if none of the parties notice it and you sign a contract, then obviously there is not a consistency in the contract. So that is why it is recommended you omit repetition and be consistent throughout the contract document. Similarly, it is recommended that redundancy should be omitted. There is no point in unnecessary increasing the pages. So if you feel something is not required really, it is not serving any purpose, so you should be willing to take it off. Because you see, whenever we are preparing a tender package, obviously we are not writing everything from the scratch. We are using some different templates from here and there, and we are customizing it for our new contract. So this is the challenge that we face very often. So because we don't want to touch whatever is coming from a very long period of time. So, but we recommend if it is not required, there is no point of keeping it in the contract document. And as I mentioned just now, be willing to change the old and tested language, because if something is going on for a long time, that does not make it right. And we have a tendency, or you can say some kind of a resistance, not to touch what is going on for a long period of time. So, but we should always be willing to make the changes and challenge whatever is going on for a long period of time. And the last point is no storytelling. Stick to the requirement. There is no point of unnecessary adding many things, which sometimes can become problematic for us. If you're putting some too many things extra, not relevant to the subject. So this is briefly about the contract language. Now, this project life cycle is quite long and it goes through many stages. I have just listed those 5 stages. So it starts with the opportunity identification. You can call it opportunity or the need. So first of all, you identify a need or an opportunity. And then the second stage is you do the concept selection. Maybe you have different ways of doing the same job. You can carry out the same work by two, three different options. So then comes the concept selection, where you have to do the feasibility study and the statement of requirements. And then comes where you are clear how you will be executing this job. So then it goes in the project definition stage, where you develop the FEED and you award a contract, and then you execute the contract. And then the last stage is the operation and monitoring of this contract. So what is important to note, if you see out of the 5 stages, in the first 3 stages, your expenditure is hardly 5 to 10%. Suppose if you have a project of suppose 10 million KD. So in the first 3 stages, you will be just spending 5% to 10% of the total project cost. And your 90 to 95% cost will be spent in the last 2 stages. So it is very, very important that you put all your resources, what we are calling as the front loading, you put your resources in the first 3 phases so that we don't make any mistake. Any mistake in the first 3 stages will lead your 90% investment useless. So this value identification is the very, very important stage. And it affects the value realization, which is the second part. So any mistake in the first part can be very costly for the company. So that is why our focus should be more when we are initiating the project, doing the feasibility selection, or developing the FEED. So this is very important. Now, this is about the project life cycle, which may be varying from say 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Now I'll be focusing on about this contract cycle time only, which is the third stage when we award a contract. So this is the typical contracting process, although it may vary from the organization to organization. And maybe some organization may be merging the 2 stages in one. But just for a understanding, I have split the whole contracting process into the 6 stages. The first stage is the contract requisition stage. In India, we normally call it indenting also. So this is the first stage. And then comes the second stage where we obtain the approvals for inviting bids. Then we have the bidding phase, then bid evaluation, and again the approval for awarding a contract, and then finally signing a contract. So these are the typical 6 stages, and then it goes for the execution. Now we will be covering each stage in detail, and we will see what activities we carry out and who are the stakeholders in each stage. As I mentioned, contract requisition stage is the most important stage of the contracting cycle, because in this stage, most of the action will happen and key decisions are made in this stage. You can see in this stage, contract requisition, the stakeholders, almost you see all departments of the company, they are the stakeholder. There are the user teams or the controlling team who define the requirements. The contracts team is also involved, who is helping in finalizing the contracting strategy. There are technical teams also from different disciplines, civil, electrical, mechanical, instrumentation, communication. So everybody is working on his part of the project. So different technical teams are involved. And then we have the project control team. We have the people from the costing, estimation, and planning. So this is also one of the important aspect that you should know what our project is going to cost us. So project control team is also having a very important function. And similarly, most of the organization, they have a reviewing system that whatever documents we are preparing, the tender package we are preparing, it should be vetted by the legal, finance, insurance, HSC, different teams, so that it is aligned with the requirements of the company and the different policies, regulations, and the law. So we have almost all organizations, they have this reviewing system. So they're also the stakeholder, and obviously the line management is one of the important stakeholders. So you see most of the stakeholders are in this first phase because we have to make the key decisions and we are having the maximum work being done in this stage. In terms of the activities, we see this stage, we finalizing the contracting strategy by involving the different stakeholders. In the contracting strategy, we decide who are the contractors we are going to invite, and about the funds availability, whether we will have the price fluctuation, whether we have the currency fluctuations. So there are different elements that we have to take care from the beginning, because if you are having some material intensive project, then you have to be careful about those conditions. There was a time when there was a lot of activities going in China, and they were buying almost all the steel from the world, and there was a crisis. So if you sign a contract without realizing, and you have a fixed price contract, and there is a scarcity of the steel in the market, then the contractor will not be able to execute the job. But if you have a commodity fluctuation clause in the contract, then the contractor can procure the steel at a higher price, and the client will reimburse the contractor because it is in the contract already. So that is why you look into the different elements of the project and take care of each element in the contracting strategy. Development of the tender package, as I mentioned, different disciplines. So different technical teams will be working to develop the tender package. And this package will be reviewed by the different, again, legal, insurance, and HSE teams. Ensuring the fund availability, this is one of the very, very important aspects, because you cannot go in the market without having the secured fund, because there is a big risk if you go in the market without securing the fund and your fund flow is disturbed, then the project will be stuck. So most of the established organization, they ensure that when they take up the project, so they have the secured fund for this project, which are logged for this project, you can say. And qualified bidders are another important requirement we mentioned before. So you must have the list of qualified contractors who can carry out this job. And obviously the line management approval is one of the important requirement. So this is the first phase where most of the action is happening. Second stage is, now once you are done with the tender package, you are ready. So you have to obtain the approvals from the your line management or the other management members or the committee. Since this decision is important before you go in the market to float a tender, so most of the organizations, they have a committee, because different committee members can look into the project from different angles. And normally this committee will have the expert from different fields. So they can look into the different angles before that project is floated in the market for the bidding. Bidding stage, this is another important stage. The stakeholders are the contracts team, because they are the one who are interacting with the contractors. And we have the user teams also, and the contractors, and there are approving authorities also. So once you float the tender in the market, which is called the invitation to bid, there are other activities also. We conduct normally a pre-bid meeting. We invite all the contractors and we explain the project requirement to them, and we highlight the key elements of the project to them. And next step is to conduct a site visit. I'm talking more about the construction contracts. In some of the services contracts, the site visit may not be so relevant, but for the construction contract, the site visit is a very, very important aspect, so that the contractor can see physically where the project will be implemented. Although the contractor may not be able to see everything, like if we have some underground facilities or something, but still it will give him how the access is to the site and what are the nearby facilities. So how easy or difficult it will be for the contractor to implement the contract. So site visit also arranged. If the contractors has got some queries on the tender package, so this is the time when they can raise those queries. And the client will prepare a reply and will issue an addendum to the tender package. So they will, maybe based on the feedback from the contractors, they make some changes to the tender package. And then finally, we receive the bids from the contractors. Next step is the bid evaluation process. So once we receive bids, then obviously the contracts team will be evaluating the bids with the help of the project management or the controlling teams. So normally the contracts team will have some kind of a plan, like how they plan to evaluate the bids. They normally form a task team, and they mobilize the resources also to carry out the evaluation, and they have some specified timeline to finish the task within certain period. So normally they will look for all the compliances, like the bid is complying to the requirement of the client, whether there are some deviations or not, or something which is deviating from the tender package. If there is a requirement of seeking some clarification, sometime it happens the contractor will make some of assumptions on its own. So we now, as a client, we ask the clarification from the bidder, and we try to clear out everything before we move on to the next stage. Obviously, we cannot have any outstanding issue in the bid of a particular contractor, and we move forward. That is not the case. So we have to resolve all outstanding issues before we move further and make a recommendation for awarding a contract to a particular contractor. So this is the bid evaluation phase. And again, the earlier approval was for floating the tender, and then we have another approval stage, which is for awarding a contract. So when we approach the management or the committees, we have to give the justification, like the contractor we have selected is based on the ranking. And suppose there is a variance to the estimate. For example, we estimated our project cost will be 5 million, and we receive a bid of the 6 million. So obviously, we have to give some justification why this variance is happening. So definitely management would like to know. And you have to obtain this 1 million extra in the funds also from the same management. So this is how this final approval is obtained from the management and the committees in the organization. And then we proceed with the award of the contract. So once it is approved by the management or the committees, then we prepare 2 sets of contracts. You might have seen in many places, even when you make a rent agreement for your house, they make 2 sets of the agreement or the contract in original. One is written by the owner and one is given to the tenant. Similarly here, we prepare 2 sets of the contract documents in original, and it is written one by the client and second is written by the contractor. So there are some other requirements also, like we have the requirements of the performance bond and insurance policies. We will be covering it in the later sections also. So the contractor has to submit the performance bond and the insurance policies before signing the contract. And we sign this memorandum of agreement, one sheet, which is signed by the authorized signatories from both the parties who are having the capacity to sign this document. And each side retains one of the set of the final contract. And then it goes for the contract execution. Like I'm not going much into the details of this section. Like they will have a kickoff meeting and then have a start date. So now basically the idea is whatever has been written in the contract, it should be implemented in verbatim as it is. So this is about the contracting processes. Different stages, stakeholders, and the activities. Now moving forward, this is about the different type of contracts. So broadly, I have categorized the contracts into 2 types. One is the construction and second is the services. The construction contracts can be further categorized in fixed price lump sum, FPLS, lump sum turnkey contract, which we call as the LSTK. And then we have the remeasurable contracts. The another category is the cost plus, and the last is the incentive based. The cost plus and incentive based are not very popular, but definitely these are the models, and we have the specific reasons to have those kind of contracts also. But I haven't seen these being used very frequently or popularly. The first three are the used commonly in the industry. So this categorization is basically based on how the cost is paid to the contractor. I'll be covering in brief because you see it is a very wide subject. I tried to make one slide where I can make a comparison between the different type of contracts. I just make the next slide, you will have a look like how can you compare the different type of construction contracts especially. So, and the second is the services contracts, where we can have the maintenance services, some operation services, some consultancy services, or our general services like your cleaning services or whatever it is. So in general, the construction contracts are catered from the CapEx budgets. This is important to note because CapEx budgets and the services contracts are in general catered from the OpEx budget, which we call as the capital budget, or you can say the operational budgets also. So just to give a very simple classification, when you do a budget, project with the CapEx budget, so basically you are creating some asset. So it is considered in the value book of the company. You see, once you see how much is the valuation of a company, so you will see how much are the assets of this company. So anything created through the CapEx budget will come in the asset book of the company. While in case of the OpEx budget, it is something like you use the services and it is exhausted. For example, you build a house. So this house is basically an asset for you. You can resell it, you can sell it in case of any need, and you will get some money back. So this is something like a capital expenditure. But if you go to a restaurant and you have a dinner, so you got the services, you had a good dinner, and you paid for it, and it is finished. So there is nothing existing anymore. So, but it is not so hard and fast. There could be some kind of a services also, which can be catered from the CapEx budget also. But that is a broader categorization I explained to you. Now coming to the construction contracts. So I will give a very brief like FPLS contract. So if you say the typical characteristic of an FPLS contract, the scope of an FPLS contract is well defined. And we don't have much of an unforeseen or unknowns in case of the FPLS contract. And we make the payment to the contractor as the progress is made by the contractor. So this is the FPLS contract. I just give a hint. This is the next slide I'm talking about. So you will see like different elements I have selected: scope, project duration, change order. So how the different contracts fare on the different elements that will be covering. But I'm just giving a very brief. FPLS contract, the scope is very well defined, and we don't have much of an unknown or unseen in case of the FPLS contract. The LSTK is also more or less similar, but only difference I can say is in the FPLS, we are defining the scope in detail for the contractor, while in the LSTK, we are giving the feed, which is the front-end engineering design, and the detailed engineering is done by the contractor. So, but these are very close to each other. So LSTK is, we are using normally for the high value and complicated projects, like if you are going to construct a gathering center or a cross-country pipeline. So there we maybe again, not so hard and fast, maybe you can use different models also. A cross-country pipeline I just mentioned, but maybe remeasurable will be more suitable for that because there could be some unknowns. So this is the LSTK. Then third is the remeasurable type. Remeasurable type is that kind of a contract where we have the bill of quantities and we have the estimated quantities. So sometimes it is very difficult, like how much is going to be my total consumption. For example, if you have to construct a fence along the border. So it's okay, you can know like what is going to be my route and how much is going to be the length, but there could be some practical situation where you may have to divert for some reasons. So for those kind of a situation, you specify the estimated quantity and you give the full bill of quantity, and you ask the contractor to quote the unit rates. So whatever is the actual consumption, we make a payment to the contractor for that. Unlike the FPLS, where the cost is defined and fixed. In the remeasurable type, this actual payment will be varying based on the actual consumption. Next is the cost plus type. In the cost plus type, we use those kind of a contracts where we have some kind of a new technology where there are so many unknowns, or where the scope is unclear. So we are not very clear about the scope, but still we have to move forward. So we can go for a cost plus model because the risk is lying with the client. And another one is when we want to do a project on a very fast track basis. So then also we use the cost plus model. In the cost plus, we have again different variants. Cost plus fixed percentage, cost plus fixed fee. There are 4 or 5 variants in the cost plus. Again, it is a full topic and require a full session on itself. And the last one is the incentive based. So in case of this incentive based contract, normally we have a targeted price and we have a target fee. But if the contractor with its effort is able to reduce the duration or the cost or the both, then the contractor is paid incentive for that. So those are the incentive-based construction contracts. Again, as I mentioned, I haven't seen those two being used very frequently in the industry, but definitely these models exist. And there are some specific cases where we can use those. Services contracts are comparatively simple contracts where we have listed down all the service requirements, all the resource requirements, and we are getting this service repeatedly. Like suppose we have a maintenance for our facility, then we specify you will be deploying so many people and so many equipment and so many consumables, and the contractor is supplying and he's getting paid for that. So these are the comparatively simple contracts, normally goes smoothly without much of a disputes and hassles. In this slide, we have made a brief comparison about different type of construction contracts. Now I have listed FPLS, LSTK, remeasurable, cost plus, and incentive. Now we see on the different element. Scope clarity or the non-scope, it is highest in case of the FPLS. It is high in case of LSTK and remeasurable. But on the other two, cost plus and incentive based, the scope clarity is low. As far as the project duration is concerned, so it is highest in case of the FPLS and LSTK, because you see, as I mentioned, we have the full clarity of the scope. It means we have spent enough time on the site survey, on doing the basic engineering activity, defining the scope, underground facilities. So we are spending a lot of time on those activities. So that is why it is duration is increasing. I am counting the full cycle. So, but in case of the other, as I mentioned, like you can just move on. Like if you ask me the cost plus and incentive, this is something like an open check contracts. You are sitting with a checkbook and you are just cutting the check for whatever work is coming. You don't even have the good estimate like how much this project is going to cost you. But in case of the other, the cost is known to you because you have spent a lot of time in developing the estimate for your project. So that is why the duration is highest in the first two type and it is decreasing in the others. Change orders. Sometimes we call it a variation order also or the adjustment order also. So FPLS, their chances are highest because you have defined the scope in a great length and great detail. So if there is a slightest variation, the contractor will immediately ask for a variation order because you have put the scope in the full clarity. So chances of the adjustment order are highest in the FPLS. If you go to the LSTK, in LSTK it is low for the reason because in the LSTK normally the client is giving the feed, front-end engineering design, while the detailing of this feed is the responsibility of the EPC contractor. So again, since the onus is on the LSTK contractor to do the detailed engineering And if they come out any discrepancy or something, some shortcoming in the feed, it is their responsibility, because the bidding period for LSTK contracts are also very high. So we have the opportunity to fix it in the bidding phase itself. So that is how the chances of the change orders become low. And definitely, because all others, the chances of the change orders are lowest. Reason being, in the remeasurable, you know from the day one, suppose you want to lay down a pipeline and you specified a length of, say, 100 kilometers. You have estimated it is going to be 100 kilometer length pipeline, and you have taken the unit rate, and it goes, say, it may become 98 kilometer or maybe 102 kilometer. So since you have already kept the provision for that, so the chances of the change orders are low, because you already have the provisions in the contract to cater to this variation. As far as the overall project cost is concerned, the FPLS is considered to be the highest. Reason being, the contractor is bearing all the risk. You can see in the very next slide, the highest risk in the FPLS is for the contractor. So the contractor will be he will be building up the all risk factor in the project cost. So in the FPLS, the cost is expected to be highest. Similarly, in the LSTK, the cost is highest. And for the all other, because the contractor is not building any risk element, it is the client who is bearing the risk. Suppose you go for a project, a new technology, and now we are suppose having a project with a 4G, and tomorrow there is a new technology 5G, and company decides to go for 5G. So it is the company risk. Company will be paying for the new equipment, the differential cost. So it may be highest cost for the company, but from the contractor point of view, the risk is not going on the contractor. Now in the risk to contractor and risk to owner, obviously this will be the reverse. In the FPLS, the highest risk is for the contractor and the lowest risk is for the company, because they have given the firm requirement from their side. Chances of the risk, if something happens, it is going to the contractor. And similarly, for the LSTK, the risk to the contractor is high, while for the company it is low. Remeasurable, it is a low risk for both the parties, because the party, the contractor is paid whatever they do, and the company also pay whatever is actually required. So it is a low risk contract for both the entities in the remeasurable. Now coming to the cost plus. Cost plus is having a different situation. The risk for the contractor is the lowest, because if there is a change to the technology, to the process, whatever, all the risk is coming to the owner or the client. So the risk to the owner is highest. As I mentioned, you are sitting with an open checkbook and you have to cut a check. In the company involvement, you can see in the FPLS, the company involvement is least, because we have already given the firm requirement to the contractor. So the risk for the company becomes the involvement becomes the lowest. They don't have to do too much involvement in the project. It is the contractor responsibility to execute it as per the defined scope. LSTK is also low for the company. Remeasurable, our scope becomes more for the client, because they have to actually monitor the site, what we have planned, how much actually it is going. Suppose we have planned 100 kilometers, now it is going 120 kilometers. So you have to do the measurement and keep a track. If there is a change in the location, if there is a change in the pipeline route, whatever it is. So the involvement of the company becomes more in case of the remeasurable contracts. And definitely the cost plus, the company is having the highest involvement, because contractor is just acting as a facilitator for you. So definitely the contractor is doing all the work for you, but you can say they are more of a facilitator. Ultimately, all the decision making has to be done by the company. All the purchase orders has to be approved by the company. All the payments has to be made by the company. So the company involvement is maximum in case of the cost plus type of a contract, and in the incentive also it is on the higher side. Now when we see from the claims and dispute point of view, FPLS will have the most. Reason being, you have a defined scope. There is a slight variation. The contractor will ask for the variation order. And if as a client you don't agree, then it goes into the claim and dispute. Similarly for the LSTK. While in case of the remeasurable, again, it is low. Chances are low because, again, same concept. You have anticipated something and you are paying for the actual. In the cost plus, the chances are lowest because the risk is all with the client. So this is a brief comparison of the different elements for different type of construction contracts. I think this subject requires much more in-depth discussion, but due to the time limitation, I think we have to just stop it here only. Now I move on to the last section, which is about the fees, bonds, and insurance policies. So the first point is the tender fee. In general, tender fee is not applied between the private entities. I haven't seen very commonly. But in case of the government organizations, they charge a tender fee for the participants for this tender document, or you can say a kind of a participation fee. And again, this fee varies based on the estimation of the tender value. And again, varies from the organization to organization also. So the way I see it, the objective looks like they want to have the serious people to make a bid, serious people to participate in the tender. You see, sometimes this tender package is running into volumes and volumes. Tender package is running in 4 volumes. Or nowadays, luckily, we have the CDs. So point is there are uninterested bidders just for the sake of exploring. They want to buy this, get the tender document. So that is why the agency or government agencies or some government organization, they want to discourage it and they want the serious people to come forward. So they normally ask for a fee for tender document. In private sector, I don't see it much. Now, coming to the different bank guarantees or the bonds. So in contracts, we have typically those 5 type of bonds or guarantees. One is the bid bond. So bid bond is basically in the form of a bank guarantee in general, or in India, it could be fixed deposit receipt, or it could be a draft also. You can have different modes also. So it is basically security against your bid. Meaning the bidder is giving a commitment that it will honor its bid for the specified validity period. Normally, the bid validity period is 90 days. So the bidder is committing itself that it will keep its bid valid for 90 days. Whatever he has quoted, he is willing to sign a contract on that value within the 90 days period. So it is a commitment from him. So for that, he has to give a bid bond. Like in the industrial environment, we see it very often. Suppose we floated a tender. Somebody is quoting 1 million, somebody is quoting 2 million, somebody is quoting 2.5 million. So when you see a big variance between the first and second bidder, then you realize like something wrong. And this bidder also realized, oh, maybe I made a mistake. And now he's looking for escape route. So you see, company has spent months and months together to float a tender. And now somebody is looking for escape route. So company doesn't allow those kind of situations. So for those reasons, the company asks for a bid bond. Like you must honor your bid for the specified period. I'll be giving the details in the subsequent slide about the typical values and when these bonds or guarantees are required and what are their validities. It will be coming in the subsequent slide. The second is the performance guarantee or the performance bond. So once the successful bidder sign a contract, then he has to stand committed for certain duration of the contract period. Like if anything goes wrong, any defect appears, then he is committing itself for that period, and for that, the contract is submitting a performance guarantee or performance bond. Many times the client give this option of advance payment. Suppose the project value is very high. So to facilitate the contractor and to ease the cash flow for the contractor, and if the client is financially sound, so they give this provision like we can make an advance payment to you, and advance payment is made to the contractor. So definitely no organization gives unsecured advance payment. Very rarely I have seen. Otherwise, most of the organizations, they want a secured security. If they are paying 1 million or 2 million KD in advance, so they want a guarantee from the bank. Not like the organization make an advance payment of 2 million KD, and then you are running here and there to locate the contractor. So they will have a bank guarantee. If the contractor is not responding or in default, they will simply ask the bank to make the payment. I will be covering the conditions for the bank guarantee in the subsequent slide. And again, there are some regulations from the government. So for fulfilling those requirements also, some of the government organizations, they ask for a tax retention. They have the provision of the tax retention. So from the each invoice, the client deduct certain percentage, which is typically 5%. And this amount is returned once the contractor brings the relevant certificates from the income tax department or the public authority for manpower, because if some visas has been issued, so the government requires a clearance from the PAM, public authority for manpower. So the contractor has to bring the relevant certificate from the different departments in order to claim this money. Sometime when we have a material intensive project where there is a high cash flow for many equipment, once we are talking about a big processing facility, for example, gathering center or a booster station or a big pipeline, where there is a lot of cash flow from the contractor side for procuring the material. So sometimes the client, if they have a sound financial position, so they give payment for the material or the equipment also, but again, they will ask for a guarantee, bank guarantee. So these are the typical 5 different guarantees that we use in the industrial environment. Now you can see in this slide, what are the typical percentages when they are submitted, and each company can have their own policy, but just to give a brief, the bid bond value will be varying from anything from 1% to 5%. If the project value is very high, you may be going for, say, maybe 1%. If the project value is not so high, you may go up to 5% of the bid value. So, and it has to be submitted along with the bid, and it has to be valid until the contract is signed, because we cannot allow the contractor to withdraw its bid until we conclude the contract signature. Second is the performance bond. Performance bond varies from 5% to 10%. If it is a complex project and it is having many dimensions, you may go up to 10%. If it is a simple contract like service contract, where there is not much risk, then you may even go up to the 5%. But definitely this performance bond is a must. And we take it as a client for every contract. Because if the contractor abandon the contract, what remedy we have? So we will recourse to the performance bond. Then similarly, advance payment. Normally, typically it is 10%, but again, if the organization decide like we have to make a higher advance payment, they can do it. Since it is against the bank guarantee, so your payment is safe, and it has to be, this guarantee has to be submitted before the advance payment is released to the contractor. And this advance payment guarantee has to be valid until this advance amount is recovered. Normally, this advance amount is recovered in phases, like whenever the contractor is submitting the invoice, we are deducting in small portions. If you take the whole money from the first invoice or the second invoice, again, there will be a crisis for the contractor. So normally, the practice is we deduct 10% of the invoice value. So 90% is paid whenever the contractor is submitting an invoice, and 10% is retained or recovered against the advance payment made to the contractor. Tax retention, as I mentioned, typically 5%. So it has to be submitted before the tax amount. Basically, the contractor can request for releasing the retention money. Suppose the contractor is having some difficulty in getting the certificate, but they are in need of the money. So they can request the company to release the retention money, and they will submit a bank guarantee in lieu of the release of this tax retention. So that is also a kind of a help to the contractor to help their cash flow. And the last one, as I mentioned, if you are making some advance stage payment for the material or the equipment, so the typical value will be the equivalent value of the equipment or the material, and it has to be submitted by the contractor before you release this payment for the material or the equipment. And again, this has to be valid until the recovery is made for this amount. Some of the key elements of the bank guarantee or the bond, like it has to be unconditional. The contractor cannot attach any conditions with this guarantee. Then it has to be irrevocable. Once a guarantee has been submitted to the client, then it cannot be revoked, neither by the bank nor by the contractor. It cannot be revoked. Third is payable at first instruction. So in case the client or the owner, they want to exercise forfeiting the bank guarantee, so they have to simply write to the bank, I want this amount to be credited to our account. Simple. Company will or the client will simply give the instruction, and the bank, without asking any question, they will release this money to the client, whatever is the bank guarantee amount. So this is the another condition. It has to be payable at the first instruction. And it is preferable that it should be issued by a bank which has a license to operate locally. There are some countries where the banks has got no credibility. I remember there was some banks in Nigeria. So the contractor said, like, we can bring a guarantee from this bank. We say no. Like, even if you want to exercise it, we can't enforce it. So if there is a contractor from any, I'm sorry, I'm not using this word, Nigeria, just for explanation, nothing against Nigeria. It can happen anywhere. So if the credibility of the banks is not good enough, then we ask like them to arrange it from some reputable bank, or we sometime ask, it's okay, we can accept a bank guarantee from other bank also, but it must be endorsed by a local bank. Because if I want to exercise this option, I cannot go to London or any other country to get this money. So if any local bank is endorsing this bank guarantee, then we will simply approach the local bank. So it makes the operation easier for the client. So they ask for a bank guarantee from a bank which is having license to operate locally. And obviously this bank guarantee should have some basic information, all the contract details, the contract number, the title, what is the value, what is the validity. So these are the key elements of a bank guarantee. So if the bank guarantee is not meeting all those elements, then normally the client doesn't accept those bank guarantees. Moving on to the last slide. So this is about the insurance policies. So in general, these are the different policies we use in the contracts. One is the erection all risk policy, general third party liability policy, workman compensation and employer's liability policy, professional liability and indemnity policy, plant and construction equipment policy. These are the different 5 types of policies. There could be some others also, which may be specific to a contract. So now, one last slide that will give you more clarity, like which policies are used in construction contract, in the service contract or the consultancy. You can see it here. Like erection all risk policy, it is generally used in the construction contract against anything going wrong, some accident is happening because of the construction activity going on. So this is against the construction risk, which is the first type. It is used in the construction contracts. As far as the general third-party liability policy is concerned, so it is almost used in all type of contracts, whether it is construction, services, consultancy. The contractor or the consultant, they have to submit a general third-party liability policy. Basically, this policy, if something happens to the third party who is operating at the site by this contractor, then this contractor should have a policy to cover any third-party damages. While workman compensation and the employer liability policy is for any contractor or the consultant for its personnel who are working under this particular contract. So this third type is also used in all contracts. And the last one is the professional liability and indemnity policy, which is in general used in the consultancy type of a contract, because the consultant will carry out some kind of a study, some kind of a design, and it will hand it over to the company, and the consultant will go while this project will be implemented much later. And any fault from this study or the design will be known much later. So normally we ask the consultant to furnish this guarantee, which can be implemented much later. So the contractor can be held accountable. I think the people from the civil may be knowing it better, like even if some design goes wrong, some bridge collapse because of the wrong design, this consultant can be held accountable up to maybe 10 years, if I remember correctly. So this is all about our today's session. I hope I'm within my time, and my apology if I took a little more time. So now we will have the this question answer sessions. If you have any questions.
Can you check your WhatsApp, please?
WhatsApp? Okay.
Yeah. I wrote the questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Parvez Sahab, for your presentation. Now, moving forward, we will leave the